deep in the forgotten corners of the Pacific Northwest, where ancient trees stand like sentinels and mist clings to the mountains like ghostly shrouds, there are secrets the forest keeps. Secrets that most people would never believe. This is the remarkable story of William Harrison, a man who kept perhaps the greatest secret of all, a living, breathing Sasquatch that he sheltered on his remote property for over 4 decades. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm one of the few who knows the truth, and before they silence me too, I need to share what really happened when the federal agents discovered William's extraordinary companion. The year was 1978, when William Harrison, a former Forestry Service employee, purchased 300 acres of dense woodland near the Cascade Mountains. The property was so remote that the nearest neighbor was 7 miles away, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that became impassable during the heavy winter snows. William had always been a loner, more comfortable among trees than people, and after 20 years of government service, he'd saved enough for his dream: complete isolation in the wilderness he loved. For the first few months, William lived in peaceful solitude, building his modest cabin by hand, fishing in the crystal-clear stream that cut through his property, and occasionally hunting deer when his stores ran low. He kept to himself, making monthly trips to the small town of Elkhorn for supplies, speaking only when necessary, and returning to his sanctuary before anyone could ask too many questions about the quiet man with the weathered face and distant eyes. It was on a frigid November evening when everything changed. A violent storm had swept through the mountains, bringing early snow and winds that howled like wounded beasts. William sat by his wood stove, nursing a cup of coffee laced with whiskey, when he heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind, wasn't an animal he recognized. Something between a moan and a cry that raised the hair on the back of his neck. He grabbed his rifle and a flashlight, stepping out into the swirling snow. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing at first. Then, as he approached the tree line, he saw what appeared to be a massive, hair-covered form slumped against a fallen log. William's first thought was that it was a bear, perhaps wounded by another hunter. But as he drew closer, his light revealed something that defied explanation. It was humanoid, standing well over 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur, the color of wet bark. One of its legs was badly injured, a crude wooden spear protruding from the thigh, the wound seeping dark blood that steamed in the cold air. And its face, God, its face was almost human, with deep-set eyes that reflected intelligence and something else William would later describe as ancient sadness. In that moment, William Harrison made a decision that would alter the course of his life and eventually lead to one of the most closely guarded government operations in modern history. Instead of shooting the creature or running away, he lowered his rifle. "I don't know why I did it," William would tell me decades later, his voice barely above a whisper as we sat in the hidden back room of his cabin. Something in those eyes spoke to me. It wasn't an animal looking at me. It was a person. Different, yes, but a thinking, feeling being. With tremendous effort, William managed to help the wounded creature to his tool shed, a structure larger and sturdier than his cabin. The being was remarkably light for its size, as though its bones were hollow like a bird's, yet possessed incredible strength even in its weakened state. Once inside, William removed the crude spear, fashioned from a sharpened branch, and cleaned the wound as best he could, using techniques he'd learned in his Forestry Service first aid courses. For 3 days, William wasn't sure if the creature would survive. It drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally making low, rumbling sounds from deep within its chest. William stayed by its side, offering water and eventually small pieces of dried venison, which it accepted cautiously from his hand. On the 4th day, the fever broke. The creature sat up, regarding William with those penetrating eyes. Slowly, deliberately, it reached out one massive hand, a hand with opposable thumbs and 5 fingers, just like a human's, but twice the size, and placed it gently on William's chest, directly over his heart. Then it placed William's much smaller hand against its own chest. A gesture of connection, of gratitude, a universal language that needed no words. "That's when I named him Sam," William told me, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "Short for Sasquatch, I guess, but also because he needed a name, and he seemed too person-like to just call creature or it. He was a he, and he was Sam." Over the following weeks, as Sam's wound healed, William began to understand the magnitude of his discovery and the responsibility that came with it. He'd encountered a living, breathing Bigfoot, a creature of legend that science declared impossible. But beyond that, he'd formed a connection with an intelligent being who communicated in ways both subtle and profound. Sam didn't speak, at least not in any human language, but he understood. William would later swear that Sam comprehended every word he said, responding with a complex system of gestures, facial expressions, and vocalizations that, over time, William began to interpret with surprising accuracy. As winter settled over the mountains, William made a critical decision. Sam would stay. The tool shed was reinforced and insulated, a makeshift home for the extraordinary being who had literally stumbled into William's life. What William didn't realize then was that he was embarking on what would become a 40-year secret, a secret that would eventually attract the attention of forces far beyond the isolated wilderness he called home. By spring of 1979, Sam had fully recovered and could have returned to wherever he came from. But something unexpected happened. He stayed. Not as a captive, William was clear about that. The shed door was never locked, and Sam would often disappear into the forest for days at a time, especially during the warmer months. But he always returned, as if William's property had become a sanctuary, a safe haven in a world that was increasingly encroaching on the wild places where Sam's kind had existed for countless generations. "I think they're dying out," William told me once, his voice heavy with the weight of the knowledge he alone carried. "Sam was old when I found him. Hard to tell exactly, but I'd guess he was already ancient by our standards. And I never saw any others, though sometimes at night I'd hear distant calls that Sam would answer, sounds that carried for miles through the valleys. But over the years, those calls came less and less often, until they stopped altogether. What began as a rescue evolved into something more complex, a friendship, a mutual protection pact, a shared secret. William learned from Sam, observing his habits, his incredible knowledge of the forest. Sam could predict weather changes days in advance, knew which plants held medicinal properties, and demonstrated strength that defied human capability, uprooting small trees with ease when William needed to clear land. In return, William protected Sam from the outside world. He never told anyone about his extraordinary companion, never took photos, never kept written records. His monthly trips to town became opportunities to collect information, to listen for rumors of strange sightings, to gauge whether anyone suspected the truth hidden on his remote property. "People in these parts have always had stories," William explained. "Legends of wild men in the mountains, unexplained footprints, strange sounds in the night. Most folks treated them as campfire tales, nothing more. But occasionally, someone would come through town. Hikers, amateur cryptozoologists, thrill seekers, looking for evidence. That's when I'd get worried." William developed a system. When strangers appeared in Elkhorn asking questions about Bigfoot sightings, the local general store owner, a taciturn man named Earl who owed William a favor from years back, would give a specific signal. William would then take precautions, ensuring Sam remained hidden deep on the property until the curiosity seekers moved on to more promising hunting grounds. For nearly 15 years, this arrangement worked. William and Sam lived in peaceful coexistence, their unusual friendship deepening with each passing season. Sam learned to use some of William's tools, showed surprising dexterity in helping with tasks around the property, and even developed a taste for William's homemade blackberry wine, which seemed to affect him much less than it did his human companion. But in 1993, everything nearly fell apart when a team of documentary filmmakers arrived in Elkhorn, armed with thermal imaging equipment and stories of recent Sasquatch sightings just 50 miles north of William's property. They were different from the usual weekend warriors, William recalled, his expression darkening. They had funding, technology, and worst of all, permits from the Forest Service to conduct their search across public and private lands. They claimed they were making a serious scientific documentary, but I knew what would happen if they found Sam. For the first time, William had to actively mislead people who came to his door. He played the role of the cranky hermit, scoffing at their questions, feeding them false information about areas where they'd be unlikely to find anything of interest. He even fabricated stories about dangerous terrain and aggressive wildlife to keep them away from the eastern portion of his land, where Sam was hiding in a natural cave system they had discovered years earlier. The filmmakers stayed for nearly 3 weeks, their presence a constant threat that kept William in a state of perpetual anxiety. But they eventually left empty-handed, their documentary destined to become just another speculative piece on the Bigfoot phenomenon, long on questions and short on answers. When they were gone, William made another fateful decision. He reached out to an old colleague from his Forestry Service days, a man named Robert Michaels, who now worked in a specialized research division of the Department of the Interior. William had never fully trusted Robert. The man was too ambitious, too eager to climb the government ladder. But he needed information about whether there were more expeditions planned for the area. It was the first mistake in a long chain of mistakes, William admitted, his hands trembling slightly as he recounted this pivotal moment. I should have just kept my head down, stayed completely off the radar. But I was getting older, and I was worried about what would happen to Sam if something happened to me. William was careful in his inquiry, framing it as simple curiosity about increased activity in the region, mentioning nothing about Sam. Robert provided the requested information, no immediate plans for more expeditions, but something in William's manner must have raised questions, because 3 months later, Robert Michaels appeared unannounced at William's cabin door, alone and unsmiling. "I know what you're hiding, Will," were Robert's first words, according to William. "And we need to talk about it, for your sake and for science." William denied everything, of course, but Robert was persistent, staying in William's cabin, watching him closely, noting his frequent trips to the tool shed that seemed far too regular for normal maintenance needs. On the 3rd day of this tense standoff, fate intervened when Sam, curious about the visitor, or perhaps concerned for William, approached the cabin in full daylight, visible through the kitchen window where Robert was sitting. The moment froze in time. Robert, coffee cup halfway to his lips, staring in disbelief at the massive figure moving with surprising grace across the clearing. William, heart pounding, knowing that everything had changed. And Sam, suddenly aware he'd been seen, retreating quickly but too late to undo what had happened. "You've had a living Sasquatch on your property all this time," Robert finally said, his voice a mixture of awe and accusation. "Do you have any idea what this means?" William did know. It meant the end of peace for both him and Sam. It meant science and government descending on them like vultures. It meant Sam becoming a specimen, a test subject, a curiosity to be studied and likely dissected. None of that could be allowed to happen. What occurred next would haunt William for years. As Robert reached for his satellite phone, a rare technology in those days, especially in such remote areas, William made a split-second decision. He grabbed his rifle not to shoot, but to threaten. "You can't tell anyone, Robert," William said, the barrel trained steadily on his former colleague. "I won't let you turn Sam into a lab experiment." What followed was a tense negotiation, one that would establish the strange status quo that would persist for the next 25 years. Robert, after his initial shock, revealed something unexpected. He wasn't entirely surprised by the existence of Sasquatch. The department he worked for, a shadowy division that officially focused on unclassified species management, had been collecting evidence for decades.
There had been tissue samples, credible sightings by government employees, even thermal imaging that couldn't be explained away.
"We've suspected for years, but never had conclusive proof," Robert explained once the rifle was lowered and both men sat across from each other, the air between them heavy with the weight of revelation. "What you've done here, Will, it's unprecedented. You've not just found evidence, you've established contact, communication, trust." Robert proposed a compromise. He would keep Sam's existence confidential from the broader scientific community and the public, but he needed to bring in a small team from his department for documentation and non-invasive study. In return, William and Sam would receive protection, ensuring that no commercial interests, media, or other government agencies would ever learn of Sam's existence. "I didn't trust him," William told me years later, "but I didn't see another option. He could have reported me, had me arrested for threatening a federal employee, and once I was gone, what would happen to Sam? At least this way, I could stay, could monitor what they did, could protect him as best I could." And so began the second phase of William and Sam's story, the years of careful, controlled government involvement that would eventually spiral into something neither William nor Robert could have anticipated. The initial team was small, just as Robert had promised. A biologist specializing in primate studies, a linguistic expert hoping to decode Sam's vocalizations, and a physician with experience in comparative anatomy. They came with minimal equipment, worked only during daylight hours, and adhered to strict protocols established by William to ensure Sam's comfort and dignity were maintained. Sam, surprisingly, seemed to accept the newcomers after initial wariness. Whether he sensed William's reluctant approval or simply understood that this limited interaction might prevent more invasive interest, he allowed basic measurements, permitted recordings of his vocalizations, and even provided hair and saliva samples voluntarily. The first reports they compiled were revolutionary, William recalled. Sam's DNA showed a complex profile, partly reminiscent of great apes, partly unique, with some markers that resembled ancient hominid species thought to be extinct for tens of thousands of years. His vocal range exceeded any known primate, and his apparent comprehension of human language suggested cognitive abilities that challenged existing understandings of intelligence evolution. For 5 years, this arrangement continued. The small team would visit quarterly, stay for no more than a week, then leave with their precious data, which Robert assured William was kept in the most secure facilities accessible only to their immediate group. William was even provided with copies of their findings, a gesture of transparency that helped ease his constant anxiety about what might be happening beyond his sight. But in 2001, everything changed again. Robert arrived alone, his face grim, bearing news that would alter their careful equilibrium. "There's been a reorganization," he told William. "Post 9/11, every department is being scrutinized, budgets reviewed, unusual projects questioned. Our division is being absorbed into a larger entity with broader oversight and different priorities. They want more comprehensive studies. They're talking about relocating Sam to a secure facility." The very scenario William had feared from the beginning now loomed as an imminent threat. He considered his options. He could run with Sam, try to disappear deeper into the wilderness, but at his age, now in his 60s, with his health beginning to fail, how far would they get? He could resist, but against the full force of government authority, what chance did he have? In desperation, William proposed a third option: expansion of the on-site research. He would allow construction of a proper facility on his land, permit longer research periods, even consider more invasive studies, as long as they didn't harm Sam, if Sam remained on the property under William's protective watch. It was another compromise, another step away from the simple life we'd once had, William said, regret evident in every line of his weathered face. But what choice did I have? The world was changing. The places where beings like Sam could remain hidden were disappearing. At least this way, I could still be his advocate, his protector. Robert agreed to present the proposal to his new superiors. 3 weeks later, construction began on what would ostensibly appear to be a research station focused on old-growth forest preservation.
a plausible cover for the increased activity on William's formerly isolated property. In reality, it was a sophisticated containment and research facility designed specifically for the study of North America's only known living Sasquatch. The new team was larger, their equipment more advanced, their methods more rigorous. William watched with growing unease as Sam was subjected to MRIs, comprehensive physical examinations, and increasingly complex cognitive tests. Sam endured it all with a stoicism that sometimes broke William's heart, those ancient eyes occasionally finding Williams across the room as if to say, "Is this the price of my safety?" The most disturbing development came in 2004, when the research focus shifted dramatically following the arrival of a new team leader, Dr. Eliza Winters. Unlike her predecessors, who approached Sam with scientific curiosity tempered by respect, Dr. Winters viewed him primarily as a specimen, a biological anomaly to be cataloged, analyzed, and ultimately explained. "We need tissue samples," she announced during her second week on site. "Muscle, organ biopsies. We can't fully understand this creature's physiology from hair and saliva alone." William objected strenuously, reminding everyone that the original agreement prohibited invasive procedures. But Dr. Winters had authorization from levels above Robert's reach, and the procedure was scheduled despite William's protests. The night before the planned biopsy, William made a decision that would set in motion the final chapter of this extraordinary story. Under cover of darkness, he disabled the security systems that had been installed around the perimeter of his property, systems ostensibly meant to keep intruders out, but which effectively kept Sam in. Then he went to Sam, communicating as best he could the danger that lay ahead. "I think he understood," William told me, his eyes distant with the memory. "He always understood more than anyone gave him credit for. I showed him the direction where the security was weakest, made the gesture we developed years ago that meant go, travel, move. But Sam refused. He made the sign that meant together and pointed at both of us. And so, in the pre-dawn hours, William Harrison and Sam the Sasquatch fled the property that had been their home for nearly 3 decades. They took nothing but a backpack of essential supplies and William's detailed knowledge of the surrounding wilderness. They headed east, deeper into the Cascade Mountains, toward areas so remote that even the Forest Service rarely ventured there. The alarm was raised within hours. What followed was one of the most extensive manhunts never made public. Helicopters with thermal imaging, tracking dogs, federal agents combing the wilderness for a 70-year-old man and an 8-foot-tall being that wasn't supposed to exist. For 3 weeks, William and Sam evaded capture, using every trick William had learned in his forestry days and Sam's innate knowledge of moving unseen through dense woodland. They traveled by night, hid during the day, and pushed ever deeper into the mountains, toward a system of caves Sam seemed to know about, perhaps from his life before meeting William. But William's age and health became the limiting factor. A fall while crossing a rocky stream bed resulted in a broken ankle, making further travel impossible. Sam, displaying the loyalty that had characterized their unusual friendship, refused to leave William behind, even when William insisted he go on alone. "That was when I realized something profound," William said, his voice breaking slightly. "We weren't just an old man and a strange creature who'd happened to live together for decades. We were family, the only family either of us had left in the world." On the 23rd day of their flight, with William feverish from infection in his injured ankle, the search teams finally closed in. As the sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the valley, Sam made a decision of his own. Gently laying William in a sheltered hollow beneath a fallen tree, he covered him with branches and leaves, a natural camouflage, then deliberately moved away, leaving tracks that even an amateur could follow. Sam was drawing them away, sacrificing himself to save William. The next hours were a blur in William's recollection. The fever, the pain, the distant sounds of pursuit moving away from his hiding place. When he was finally discovered, nearly a day later, it was by a regular Forest Service search and rescue team, not the federal agents who had been pursuing them. As far as these rescuers knew, they'd simply found a lost hiker, an old man who'd foolishly ventured too far into the wilderness alone. William was hospitalized for 2 weeks. During that time, he heard nothing about Sam, saw no news reports about the capture of a legendary creature, received no visitors from the research team that had been stationed on his property. It was as if the entire extraordinary episode had been erased, classified out of existence. Upon his release, William returned to find his property abandoned. The research facility had been dismantled, the equipment removed, the area meticulously restored to appear undisturbed. Only Robert Michaels was waiting for him, sitting on the porch of the cabin that now seemed impossibly empty. "They have him," Robert said simply. "At a facility I'm not cleared to know about. It's out of my hands now, Will. I'm sorry." For the next 10 years, William tried every avenue he could think of to discover Sam's fate. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests that were denied for national security reasons. He reached out to his few remaining contacts in government service. He even considered going public with the whole incredible story. But who would believe him without evidence? And what would happen to Sam if he did? It was in 2018 when I entered this story. As an investigative journalist specializing in government secrecy, I'd been working on a series about classified research programs when a cryptic message arrived from a source inside what was described only as a specialized biological containment facility. The message contained just 3 lines. Specimen S. Living Sasquatch in government custody since 2008. William Harrison. That name led me to the remote cabin where I found an old man, now in his 80s, waiting as if he'd been expecting someone like me for years. Over the course of 3 clandestine visits, William shared the story I've now related to you. During my 4th visit, William gave me something he'd kept hidden all this time. A single clear photograph of Sam, taken during the early days of their friendship, showing those remarkable eyes that had first convinced William of Sam's sentience. "I always told them I never took pictures," William explained. "It was safer that way. But I needed one, just one, to remember him by if anything happened. And now I need someone else to have it, someone who can use it to find the truth." Armed with the photograph and William's detailed account, I began my own search for Sam, utilizing contacts and investigative techniques I'd developed over years of reporting on black-budget programs. What I discovered was both more and less than I'd expected. Sam was indeed being held in a government facility, though not one that officially existed in any public record. Through careful source development and cross-referencing of personnel movements, I located the facility, a repurposed Cold War-era bunker complex built into the side of a mountain in eastern Nevada, ostensibly serving as a biological research station focused on desert ecology. My source, who requested anonymity even in this account, worked as a medical technician at the facility for 3 years. What they described painted a picture both fascinating and disturbing. Sam was alive but aging rapidly, kept in a habitat designed to approximate his natural environment, but clearly artificial. A team of scientists continued to study him, with particular interest in his cognitive abilities, his DNA, and his capacity for communication. They've developed a rudimentary sign language with him, my source revealed. They believe he's attempting to convey information about others of his kind, possibly indicating locations in the Pacific Northwest where small family groups might still exist. This revelation was both hopeful and alarming. Hopeful because it suggested Sam might not be the last of his species, but alarming because of what might happen if the government located these remaining Sasquatch. Would they too be captured, studied, kept in artificial environments? Was a species that had managed to remain hidden for thousands of years about to be dragged into the light for human curiosity and potential exploitation? In December 2019, I returned to William's cabin to share what I'd learned. The winter had been harsh, and I found the old man confined to his bed, attended by a hospice nurse from the nearest town, who came twice weekly to check on him. William was dying, his body finally giving out after a lifetime in the wilderness. As I related the information about Sam, a complex emotion crossed William's weathered face. Relief that his friend was alive, sorrow at his confinement, and determination that somehow formed in the set of his jaw. "I need to see him," William whispered, his voice barely audible. "Before I go, and he needs to be free. What followed was perhaps the most unlikely prison break in history. Using my journalistic credentials as cover, I made arrangements for William, presented as my elderly uncle with a keen interest in botany, to visit the desert research station on the pretense of writing an article about its ecological work. The request was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but not suspicions. And after several weeks of correspondence, we received clearance for a guided tour of the facility's public-facing sections. On a cold February morning in 2020, I helped William into my rented SUV for the long journey to Nevada. He was frail, moving with the assistance of a cane, his once powerful frame diminished by age and illness. But his eyes burned with purpose, and in his pocket was a small device he'd asked me to procure, a universal remote signal jammer capable of temporarily disabling most electronic security systems. I worked with these systems for years, William explained as we drove. I know their vulnerabilities. We'll only have minutes, but minutes might be enough. Our tour of the facility began routinely enough. A public relations officer led us through laboratories where researchers studied desert plants and soil samples, explaining the importance of understanding fragile ecosystems in the face of climate change. William played his role perfectly, the elderly nature enthusiast asking basic questions, appearing slightly confused at times, leaning heavily on his cane as we moved from room to room. It was when we reached the eastern wing of the complex that William implemented his plan. Feigning exhaustion, he asked to sit for a moment in a conveniently located hallway that, according to my source's information, was separated from Sam's habitat by just 2 security doors. As our guide went to fetch water, William activated the signal jammer. Alarms immediately began to sound, but not the ones we expected. Rather than security alerts, fire alarms blared throughout the facility. Later, we would learn that the jammer had interfered with temperature sensors in one of the laboratories, triggering the emergency protocols. It was an unintended but fortuitous development as staff began a practiced evacuation procedure. In the confusion, William moved with surprising speed for a man his age, discarding the cane as we made our way to the security doors. The electronic locks were temporarily disabled by the jammer, allowing us access to areas that should have been strictly off-limits. Following the memorized directions from my source, we navigated through a series of corridors until we reached what appeared to be a massive terrarium, a space the size of a basketball court, filled with living trees, a small stream, and carefully controlled lighting that simulated natural daylight. And there, sitting beside the artificial stream, was Sam. He was older, his once dark fur now streaked with gray, his massive frame somewhat diminished, much like William's. But those eyes, those remarkable, intelligent eyes, were unchanged, and they widened with unmistakable recognition when they fell upon William. What happened next was a moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Sam rose to his full height, still an impressive 8 feet despite his age, and moved toward the glass barrier that separated him from William. What happened next was a moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Sam rose to his full height, still an impressive 8 feet despite his age, and moved toward the glass barrier that separated him from William. William placed his hand against the glass, and Sam mirrored the gesture, their palms separated by inches of transparent material, but connected by decades of shared history. No words were exchanged, none were needed. In that silent communication, a plan seemed to form between them. Sam backed away from the glass, gesturing for us to do the same. Then, with a strength that belied his apparent age, he picked up a large rock from the artificial landscape and hurled it at the observation window. The glass, designed to withstand significant force, cracked but held. Sam repeated the action, this time with a fallen tree limb used as a battering ram. On the third impact, the window gave way, sending shards of safety glass cascading to the floor. Alarms changed their tone and intensity, indicating a breach more serious than a fire. We had minutes at most before security personnel would converge on the habitat. Sam stepped through the broken window, ducking his massive head, and for the first time in 12 years, stood in the same space as William Harrison. Their reunion was brief but profound. Sam gently embraced the frail human who had changed the course of his life decades ago, a careful hug that seemed to communicate everything words could not. William pointed toward the exit, trying to indicate that Sam should run, escape, return to the wilderness where he belonged. But Sam shook his head, a gesture he'd learned from years of human observation. With gentle insistence, he lifted William as easily as one might pick up a child and carried him toward the door. "He won't leave without you," I realized aloud, urging them both to hurry as the sound of approaching security personnel echoed down the hallway. What followed was a chaotic escape that succeeded only because of its sheer audacity and the facility's lack of preparation for such an unlikely scenario. Sam, carrying William, moved with surprising speed through the corridors, following emergency exit signs. I ran ahead, using the jammer to disable doors when necessary, creating as much confusion as possible by triggering fire suppression systems and other alarms. We emerged into the desert twilight just as the facility went into full lockdown. The parking area was largely empty due to the evacuation, and we managed to reach my SUV without immediate pursuit. Sam carefully placed William in the back seat, his massive frame somehow folding into the vehicle beside the old man despite the seemingly impossible dimensions. As we drove away from the facility, no shots were fired, no immediate pursuit visible in my rearview mirror. This struck me as odd until William provided the explanation. "They won't acknowledge he exists," he said weakly from the back seat. "They can't report that they lost a Sasquatch without admitting they had one."
They'll come for us, but quietly, deniably. We drove through the night, heading north toward the mountains that had been Sam's home. William directed us to a remote area of the Cascades, a location he hadn't shared even during our long interviews, a place he'd kept secret as a last resort, a final sanctuary. "Sam showed me this place once," William explained as we helped him from the vehicle at the end of a barely visible forest road. "It's where his family used to gather before they began to disappear." The location was remarkable. A hidden valley accessible only through a narrow pass, with thermal springs that kept it warmer than the surrounding mountains even in winter, rich with vegetation and game, and featuring a complex cave system that could provide shelter year-round. A perfect refuge for creatures that wish to remain unseen by human eyes. We made camp in one of the outer caves, and as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, William Harrison passed peacefully in the presence of his extraordinary friend. Sam's reaction to William's death was unmistakably human in its grief, a keening sound that echoed through the valley, a gentle rocking motion as he cradled the old man's body, and what could only be described as tears moistening the fur around those ancient, knowing eyes. With Sam's help, we buried William in the valley, marking his grave with a cairn of stones in a small meadow where wildflowers would bloom in spring. I had 1,000 questions for Sam about his species, his history, his understanding of the world, but they seemed invasive, inappropriate in the face of his mourning. Instead, I simply sat with him in silence as the day progressed. As evening approached, I knew I needed to leave, to return to civilization before my absence triggered suspicions. I tried to explain this to Sam, using both words and gestures, unsure how much he understood. His response was to lead me to a different cave, deeper in the valley, where, to my astonishment, I found evidence that William's hope had been correct. Sam was not alone. Deep in the recesses of the cave, partially hidden behind a natural rock formation, were 3 other Sasquatch, a female and 2 younger ones, perhaps adolescents by their species standards. They regarded me with the same intelligent wariness I'd seen in Sam's eyes when we first broke him out of the facility, staying back in the shadows, clearly unaccustomed to human presence. Sam made a series of vocalizations, clicks, deep rumbles, and something like whispered speech that seemed to reassure the others. The female approached cautiously, studying me with intense curiosity. Around her neck was a crude but unmistakable necklace made of polished stones and woven plant fibers, evidence of culture, of artistic expression, of a level of civilization that science had never attributed to these legendary beings.
Sam pointed to the necklace, then to me, then made a gesture that William had once described to me, a circular motion with both hands that meant protect, keep safe. He was entrusting me with their secret, asking me to become their new guardian in William's absence. I nodded, hoping to convey my understanding and agreement. As a final communication, Sam led me back outside and to the edge of the valley, where he pointed at my notebook and pen, then made writing motions. He wanted me to record their story, to document their existence, not for scientific validation or public spectacle, but as a testament to their survival against all odds. And so, I have.
But I've changed names, altered locations, obscured certain details that might lead others to find this hidden valley. The photograph William gave me remains secure, to be released only if the need to prove their existence outweighs the danger such proof might bring. The signal jammer was destroyed, my tracks carefully covered, my source at the facility never contacted again. In the 3 years since that extraordinary day, I've made only 2 return visits to the valley, bringing supplies that might be useful, medical equipment, tools, seeds for plants that thrive in changing climate conditions. Each time, I've been welcomed with gentle acceptance by Sam and his small family group. Each time, I've observed more evidence of their rich, complex lives. Tools fashioned from stone and wood, cave paintings depicting their history, systems for food storage and water collection that reveal sophisticated planning. On my last visit, 6 months ago, I discovered something remarkable: crude symbols etched into flat stones arranged in sequences, the beginnings of a written language, perhaps inspired by the books William had shared with Sam over their decades together. Sam pointed to these symbols with evident pride, then to the younger Sasquatch, indicating that they were the ones developing this new form of communication. They are not simply surviving, they are adapting, evolving, finding ways to preserve their culture even as their traditional world shrinks around them. I tell you this story now because there are rumors in my journalistic circles that the facility in Nevada has been completely decommissioned, its personnel reassigned, its records sealed or destroyed. The official research project appears to have been abandoned following the security breach that was never publicly acknowledged. But I don't believe for a moment that the government has given up its interest in Sasquatch. Somewhere, in some other classified facility, the search for these beings continues. Perhaps they're analyzing the DNA samples collected from Sam during his captivity. Perhaps they're developing more advanced thermal imaging to penetrate the deep forests where small family groups might still roam. Perhaps they're training specialists in Sasquatch communication, preparing for future contact. And so this account serves as both documentation and warning. These remarkable beings exist. They think, feel, create, and communicate. They have managed to survive alongside humanity by remaining hidden, by retreating further into the last wild places as our cities expand and our technologies advance. They may be the last megaprimates besides ourselves on the North American continent, living fossils from an age before written history, with knowledge and perspectives that could revolutionize our understanding of human evolution and cognition. But they are also vulnerable, their numbers dwindling, their habitat shrinking. If they are to survive the coming decades, they need protection, not as specimens or curiosities, but as an intelligent species with their own right to existence and privacy. William Harrison understood this from that first moment in the snowy forest when he looked into Sam's eyes and saw not a monster or a missing link, but a person worthy of respect and protection. For 40 years, he kept that understanding sacred, sacrificing his connection to his own kind to preserve the dignity of another. In the end, William and Sam chose freedom over safety, friendship over security, truth over comfortable lies. Their story challenges us to consider what other wonders might exist in the disappearing wild places of our world, and what responsibility we bear to protect not just what we understand, but what we have yet to comprehend. As for Sam and his family, they remain in their hidden valley, living as they have for countless generations, adapting to a changing world in their own way. I will continue to visit when I can, to bring supplies, to document their existence without exposing it, to honor the promise I made to both a remarkable man and an even more remarkable being. Sometimes, on clear nights when the wind is right, I camp at the edge of the valley and listen. From the darkness come sounds unlike any other on earth. Deep, melodic calls that carry through the mountains, perhaps reaching other hidden valleys where other small groups maintain their ancient way of life. It is both mournful and hopeful, a sound that has echoed through these forests since before humans built their first cities. A reminder that we have never been as alone on this continent as we believed. And sometimes, when the calling ceases, I imagine I hear a response from far away, faint but unmistakable, a confirmation that Sam's people still exist beyond this one protected valley, still find ways to survive in a world that has forgotten how to believe in wonders it cannot control. I do not know how many Sasquatch remain, or how long they can endure as development pushes ever deeper into their domain. But I know this: as long as there are those who value mystery over mastery, who understand that not all living beings exist for human benefit or study, there remains hope for Sam's kind. The most profound lesson from William Harrison's extraordinary 40-year secret is perhaps this: sometimes the greatest service we can render to another species is to protect their story without claiming it as our own, to acknowledge their right to remain beyond our understanding, to respect the boundaries they have drawn around their existence. In the years since William's death and Sam's return to freedom, I've often wondered what might have happened had William made different choices, if he had reported his discovery immediately, if he had sought scientific recognition, if he had allowed Sam to become public knowledge. The most likely outcome would have been Sam's lifetime confinement, examination, and eventual display. A magnificent being reduced to a specimen, a scientific curiosity, his intelligence and dignity secondary to his biological uniqueness. Instead, William chose a harder path, one that required personal sacrifice and constant vigilance. He chose to see Sam not as a discovery that belonged to science or humanity, but as an individual whose existence did not require human validation to have meaning and worth. As I conclude this account, I realize that I am now the keeper of not one, but two extraordinary legacies: William Harrison's lifetime of dedicated protection and Sam's continuing story as he leads his small family group into an uncertain future. It is a responsibility I never sought, but cannot decline. For having seen the reality behind the legend, I cannot pretend ignorance. And so I make this record, to be held in trust, to be shared only when the time is right, perhaps when humanity has developed the wisdom to approach such beings with respect rather than ownership, with wonder rather than analytical dissection. Until that day, I will be the guardian of their secret, the chronicler of their continuing journey, the bridge between two intelligent species sharing one planet but living in vastly different worlds. For those who doubt this account, who dismiss it as fantasy or fiction, I can offer no proof that would not endanger the very beings I have sworn to protect. I ask only that you consider the vastness of our wilderness, the hubris of scientific certainty, and the long history of discoveries that were once deemed impossible. In the deepest forests of the Pacific Northwest, where ancient trees stand like sentinels and mist clings to the mountains like ghostly shrouds, Sam and his family continue their ancient way of life. They gather food according to seasonal rhythms, communicate in their complex language of sounds and gestures, create their simple but meaningful art, and perhaps, in their own way, tell the story of the strange, hairless being who lived among them for a time. A man who recognized their personhood when all of his kind would have seen only a creature. And somewhere in a classified government archive, files exist documenting the 40 years of secret contact. The DNA analysis confirming a species science has never acknowledged. The cognitive tests revealing intelligence we have yet to fully comprehend. Perhaps someday those files will be declassified, and the world will learn what a few have known for decades. We are not alone in our intelligence.
not unique in our capacity for communication, tool use, and culture. Until that day, the secret remains in the keeping of the trees, the mountains, and the few humans who have been privileged to glimpse the truth behind the legend. And in a small meadow in a hidden valley, wildflowers bloom each spring over the grave of William Harrison, a man who kept the greatest secret in natural history for 40 remarkable years, not for fame or fortune, but for friendship, for respect, and for the profound understanding that some wonders deserve to remain wild and free. As for what the federal agents did when they found William's extraordinary companion, the answer is both simpler and more complex than most would imagine. They did what bureaucracies always do when confronted with something that challenges their understanding of the world. They classified, contained, and studied. They reduced a mystery to data points. They attempted to own what was never theirs to possess, but in the end, they failed, because they never understood what William grasped instinctively on that snowy night in 1978, that some connections transcend species, some loyalties outlast captivity, and some truths can never be fully captured in laboratory reports or government files. Sam is free now, living as his kind has always lived, at the edges of human awareness, in the shadows of our certainty, a reminder that our knowledge has boundaries and our dominion has limits. And perhaps that is as it should be, in a world that grows smaller and more mapped with each passing year. Perhaps we need the Sasquatch not as specimens in zoological gardens or genetic libraries, but as symbols of the mysteries that still elude us, the frontiers of understanding we have yet to cross. I often think of William's words, spoken to me during our final conversation before the daring rescue. Some secrets aren't ours to expose. Some discoveries belong to themselves. In honoring that wisdom, I have told this story not to convince skeptics or vindicate believers, but to preserve a record of an extraordinary friendship that bridged the divide between two intelligent species sharing one fragile planet. The truth about Sasquatch remains where it has always been, in the deepest forests, the highest mountains, the places where humans rarely venture and nature still holds sway. And perhaps that truth is not meant to be captured in scientific journals or government reports, but in stories passed down, in glimpses at the corner of vision, in the knowledge that our understanding of this world and its inhabitants remains profoundly incomplete. So, listen. On quiet nights when the wind moves through ancient trees, or sounds unlike any other, deep, resonant calls that carry through valleys and across ridges, a communication as old as the mountains themselves. In those moments, you might sense what William Harrison knew with certainty: we are not alone. We have never been alone, and the greatest discoveries are not those we capture and classify, but those we respect enough to let remain wild and free.